Behind me here once stood 25 Cromwell Street, the epicentre of where two of the country's most notorious serial killers committed some of the most heinous crimes in our history. Fred and Rose West collectively murdered 12 young women over the span of 2 decades and buried them within their house, known as the House of Horrors. Their reign of terror and torture scarred so many lives, the victims, their families, and the people of Gloucester. We've exclusively spoken to one of those people, a lady named Jane Hamer, a former lodger of 25 Cromwell Street and a survivor of Fred and Rose West. Jane, thank you very much for joining. You say that before this interview you left home. Can you talk me through why you left?
Yeah, I unfortunately didn't realise myself I was grieving. Lost my dad at the age of 14 and decided that I'd probably have more fun if I lived on my own. So the day of my 16th birthday I just upped and left home without telling anybody and hid away for 6 months.
How did you come to meet the West family?
I bumped into Anne-Marie in town. And I was talking about, I'd love to get my own place because I was living in a house with other people, which I wanted to be out on my own. And she just said, my parents have got a spare room. I'll take you to see them and see if they'd like to let it to you. And that's how I became to move into Cromwell Street.
Did you just bump into her in town? Were you part of the same friendship group at all? Or
I'd known Anne-Marie from school, so that's how I'd sort of just stopped and had a chat with her, and that's how she mentioned the room that was going.
So you were friends, you obviously knew Anne-Marie, now you also knew Charmaine as well.
Yeah, Charmaine and Anne-Marie were both at school, in my junior school. They were below myself because I'm the elder of the three. Charmaine was a year below myself and Anne-Marie was 2 years below myself.
Can you talk me, what was your friendship like with them? What were they like as people?
Anne-Marie was far more reserved than Charmaine. She didn't mix quite as easily, but Charmaine mixed with everybody and loved coming along and saying, can I join in your games? Can we play tally-hally-ho? And can we run around the playground like headless chickens?
What kind of feelings did you get when you were around her?
She was just a very happy person. Charmaine was just so bubbly, so full of life. And as I say, Anne-Marie was a little bit quieter.
So you eventually got this room in 25 Cromwell Street. Can you talk to me exactly sort of maybe the days leading up and the preparations that were there that saw you move in?
There was very little preparation. I went to meet Fred and Rose and they said to go and have a look at the room, which I went that evening after they'd finished in the calf. I had a look at the room. It was a nice enough room and I decided to take it and I moved in within the next few days.
What were your first impressions of Fred and Rose?
Amenable, friendly. I only looked at them as landlord and landlady, so I wasn't looking for friendship in any way, if that makes any sense. But they were pleasant enough.
Now, most people know what the outside of 25 Cromwell Street looks like. It's very well publicised. It's not there anymore, obviously. Can you talk me through what it was like inside and maybe talk about what your room was like as well?
Yeah, you go in and you've got a room to the left, which was Rose's room, a room to the right, which was the family room, of which, unless invited, you never went into. Going up the stairs, you had a floor, which was Anne-Marie's room and Shirley's room. And then right at the top of the house was my room, and there was another couple there, Gloria and Keith. When you go through the living room as you come into the right, you go through into the kitchen out into the garden. It was always very, very clean. It was always very, very clinical. I only found that out when I was allowed to start going through there after looking after the children a few times.
You just said there that you, the family room, you were only allowed to go in there if you were invited. Why was that?
Well, they were landlord and landlady. I was renting the room off them, not the house off them. The only reason I ended up getting invited in there was because I used to babysit the children when Rose and Fred went out. I believe Anne-Marie was out with them. So that it was the door that you knocked on. If you're going to pay your rent, you knock on that door to pay your rent, but you don't go in because it was theirs. It was their house. It was their room.
You say it was very clinical. Can you sort of expand on that a bit more? Was it not a warm place to be, maybe?
It always felt warm to me because the children were there. The children always seemed to be happy enough. But it was very, very... It was like it had been scrubbed within it through its life. It was always smelt very bleachy, very clean. There was minimalistic furniture. For back in that day, I found that a bit strange because most places had junk everywhere. But yeah, it was always very tidy, very clean, and very, very bleach effect.
Was Rose the one that cleaned, or did they have other people coming in to do it?
No, Rose did the cleaning, Rose did the barking, Rose did the cooking.
She was... Did you maybe get the feeling that she was maybe the lady of the house?
Oh, she was definitely the lady of the house.
Sort of.
Yeah, as I got to know her, she was a lot more abrasive. Fred was always a very happy-go-lucky person, very jolly person, whereas Rose could very often be heard barking at the children before they went to school and when they came in from school.
So you've moved in and you're living there. Can you just talk me through about some of the experiences that you had there?
When you say experiences, I got friendly with the family. As I say, started to babysit the children. Got very friendly with Shirley that lived there. In fact, we became very good friends. We used to go into each other's room. I never realised that Shirley was pregnant until she told me, and I never really believed that it was Fred. So it was just something, whatever. You're just trying to tell me you've been with the landlord, sort of thing. And then, just a few weeks before I actually left, I got taken to the cellar and showed the cellar by Fred. Come and have a look at the cellar. Look what I've done for the children. To which I stayed in there for no more than 2 minutes because I found it very dank, very dreary, and just not my sort of thing. I'm claustrophobic anyway, so for me to go down there wasn't a very nice place.
What was maybe your first initial feeling, if you can remember at all?
It just felt so dark, so dank. He decorated it out for the children. He showed me there was a little box of toys, there was a little bed for them in case they got tired when they were playing. Obviously not knowing what had been going on in there, I just thought, that's a nice thing to do for your children. It's a little bit dark, but if they want to, most kids would say, we've got a little cave down there, we'll play in it. So I kind of thought in some ways it was a nice thing to do.
Why did you think he wanted to take you down there?
I believe in some ways, ever since I've thought about these things properly, I'm just kind of thinking in my own head I was probably going to be the next victim. It's the only reason to show me a cellar. Why would you want to show me a cellar? My other experiences I had were I'd be sat in the living room with the children some nights and the doorbell would go and a red light would go, and I was informed that this is when Rose had her gentleman in.
Were you aware of anything in there, the goings on, the activities that ever made you feel uncomfortable?
The only thing that I had found out was obviously that Rose was seeing other gentlemen, but then how people want to live their lives is their way of doing it, whatever. And the only finding out was the reason that I left, which was that I found out that Fred was abusing Heather as a child.
How did that make you feel?
Disgusted, angry. But I was 17 by then and nobody would listen to me.
I want to move you on to sort of maybe your individual relationships that you had with Fred and Rose separately. Shall we start off with Fred?
Fred was a very, very amenable person, very happy, very outgoing. He'd pass the time of day if he'd see you. I mean, he was out at work most of the time. On the occasions that I was allowed to go through to the back of the house to hang the washing out, he might be out there pottering around doing work out in the garden. He'd have a little chat. Yeah, he was a very jolly person.
And what about Rose?
Rose at times was amenable, but she was hard work. Very abrupt with the children. Very, very abrupt with Anne-Marie. It seemed that Anne-Marie had to get the children ready for school in the mornings. But I think because I babysat the children, I got a little bit more politeness out of her at times, especially when she wanted me to do something. And it'd very often be, yes, you can go through on this day, but no, you can't go through on that day. So Rose was definitely the one that was calling the shots.
Can you talk me through about the relationship between Fred and Rose? What did you observe? How did you perceive it?
I observed a very loving couple. They seemed to do things as a duo. It was almost at times when they were both home together, they were joined at the hip doing things. Their conversations together were quite loving. I didn't witness a lot of it because obviously not being around them 24/7, but when I was around them, I could see that there was a lot of thought for each other, which was what shocked me when I found out that Rose was having other men in the house. But then if you're that much in love with somebody, you let them do what they want.
I kind of want to move on now to how it came about you leaving and how you did it.
I heard for a few nights something which disturbed me. It was Fred, I believe, breaking Heather in. It was told to me on asking the question, what do you mean? He feels it's the right to break his daughters in before any other man gets them. Heather was approximately 8 years old at the time, so I found it unacceptable. But the age I was and the way that I moved in, I didn't feel that I could talk to anybody because nobody's going to believe a 17-year-old. So I decided that I would leave. I found other accommodation. I didn't tell them that I was leaving until the day I was leaving. I'd taken my stuff out bit by bit, and on the day that my rent was due, I just approached them and said, I'm moving out. Oh, when? Now. So there was no chance of me staying. So yeah, I just left the day my rent was due.
What you heard between Fred and Heather, what kind of emotions did that instill in you?
I just kind of doubted myself to start with, but after hearing it several nights in a row, the words will haunt me for the rest of my life. Stop it, Daddy, stop it. I just couldn't be part of that.
Obviously, a number of years passed between you moving out and then when social services began investigating the children at 25 Cromwell Street, which then obviously led to the arrest of Fred and Rose. How did you feel when you first heard that they'd both been arrested?
Gobsmacked. I started to see that about Heather initially. That was just disbelief because I'd looked after Heather as a child and that was the one that he'd been with when I was there. And it did bring up to my head, could I have stopped it? Did I do the right thing? But the answer's going to be the same forever. Nobody would believe me. It was just utter disbelief.
What was Heather like?
Chatty. Heather, May and Stephen were the three that I looked after, and we'd always have fun. I was no more than a child myself. I was 16, 17. We'd play hopscotch. We'd play silly games. They were just normal children.
When you look back, obviously you were aware of what Fred was doing to Heather. Was there any inclination in how she was in her manner that showed that?
No, this is the frustrating thing. You could never have picked up because they were just a normal family.
Once police pressed charges, CPS pressed charges, were you surprised at the scale of them?
Very surprised, very hurt to think that could have been going on while I was there. I've not looked at the timescales of things. And to think that I was in the house with some of those people. Or bodies.
Did you ever go out into the garden?
Yeah, you had to go to get to the cellar, you had to go out through the garden at the patio, and the washing line was out there, so I'd been hanging my washing out. Yeah, not knowing anything.
Do you believe that there could have been, you say obviously you don't know the timescales, but obviously we know there were a number of bodies buried beneath the patio in the garden. Did that happen potentially whilst you were there, or maybe afterwards?
No, I think that must have been before, because the timescale that I can think about at the moment is the last person's life that they took was Shirley, who was my friend. I'd left Shirley there, saying I'd see her again when she'd had the baby. I'll see you again. When you move out, we'll have coffee and whatnot together. That was the last person. So I believe the other bodies were there way before that. So yeah, I'd been walking across people.
You say Shirley was your friend. How was that when you found out?
I think that's the one that hurt. Apart from Heather, Shirley hurts the most, because I'd left her with child, disbelieving that the child was Fred's, and she just never came out of it. It probably would have been me.
I want to move on to the trial. Now, you've told us before this interview that you didn't want to go to the trial. Can you tell us about that?
I didn't want to go to the trial. I had a young family at the time, and I didn't want them dragged through the hedges because of what I knew, or where I'd lived, more to the point. I did try to avoid it until they threatened to subpoena me. Yeah, I just didn't want to, because it wasn't fair on my family.
Had you not talked to them at all at this point about anything that had happened?
I'd not talked to anybody, not even my family, not even my parents. The first time they heard about it was my mum rang me to say, "Oh my goodness me, you know where you lived?" I went, "Yes, Mum." She said, and then she put the time scale together, and that made her very ill for a long time. And I think, to be fair, to this day, I still haven't told everybody everything, because there's bits that can stay locked away.
Can you tell us about the trial? How was it going through that process?
My initial interview with the police when they came to see me in Plymouth was, I told them what I could remember, and they said, "That's fine, you're not going to be needed at trial." So then I get the letter and the phone call to say that I was needed, and as I said, I avoided it. Eventually, when they got me there, it was awful. I was kept in a room on my own. I wasn't allowed to mix with the other witnesses. I didn't realise that I was quite a big person in the trial. On the stand, I just looked her straight in the face, because I had nothing to hide. I'd done nothing wrong. I needed her to see that she wasn't scaring me. It was heart-wrenching coming out with what I had to tell, but I'm glad I did it.
What kind of feelings did you get when you saw Rose? Did she look remorseful in any way? What did she look like?
No, she just sat there and smiled, and all I felt was pure hate.
You told me that you looked Rose straight in the eyes when you were sat in that dock. You've also told me that you were very apprehensive about going to trial. How did you feel once you had been there and answered the questions from both defence and prosecution that obviously led to the conviction of Rose?
I felt glad. I felt relieved that I'd been able to add a part to convict a person that had done such heinous murders.
With Fred specifically, now he obviously died in prison reasonably early. I wonder whether or not you feel justice was really served there.
I feel that some sort of justice was served, but I also think that he should have stood trial with the woman he loved for his part, or their part, in such heinous murders.
Were you relieved when the verdicts came through?
Very relieved. To think that somebody is actually going to, that they've made somebody accomplishable for what has happened to those poor people.
So the trial happened, came to an end. Rose got convicted, sent to prison for the rest of her life. I want to sort of talk through the sort of maybe next few weeks, months after the trial. What impact did going through that process, that trial, have on you?
It caused me to be nervous about people that I didn't know. It put mistrust in people that spoke to me in the street. I had a young family. I wanted to defend my family to the hilt. I didn't want them pulled through this. I was contacted by several journalists and I asked them to leave me alone. It probably took a couple of months for it to just go back into its cage and be locked up again. But I'm a family person and I threw myself back into my family, so that helped a lot.
Are there any things that you deal with now? Any experiences that maybe you relive or anything like that despite all these years that have sort of passed, it's been a very long time.
For 25 years, I avoided any knowledge of it. Once I'd locked it back up, it stayed locked up. And then as people started to approach me to talk about the situation, it's actually helped me in some ways, talking and reliving it, because I am sure I was the next victim. So it's made me come to terms with that. And it's also made me come to terms with the fact that I was very, very lucky to get out of there, because 16, 17, you leave home. It's not always the best thing to do, There are only a couple of little bits that sometimes rear, which is the word "stop it daddy," and I fight with myself at times when I hear or see things about them to think, could I have done anything differently? I beat myself up over it and I tell myself, no, I couldn't have done anything. Nobody would have believed me.
I want to talk about some positive things. How have you managed to rebuild your life?
With the help of a loving family. I do absolute stacks of voluntary work. That gets me through just about everything. Hobbies, crazy hobbies I've had over the years, scuba diving. My latest one is RC racing. I just, even though my children are now grown up and I have grandchildren, we're still a family and will always be a family, and each and every one of those knows what's happened but have stood by me, so that have helped me, and that's how we have a positive outcome. We've had a lot of obstacles in our lives, illnesses with my son, but they've all pulled me through because I had them to focus on and build my life back up again.
Now this might be a difficult one, you've kind of just touched on it. I wonder if you feel that you were lucky to have made it out. I mean, do you feel that there's any reason why you couldn't have been another victim?
I feel extremely lucky that I actually left when I did. Hearing what I heard could have put me in a vulnerable position. I'd previously had my boyfriend, didn't I? I'd split with him, which was one of the other decisions. I decided to move out. And I think had I told them that I was moving out, I always say to myself, if you'd have told them that you were moving out, you would not have moved out of that front door. You probably would have moved in with the rest of them in the patio or the cellar.
So you're sat in front of me now with a lot of life experience. If you could go back and speak to 16-year-old Jane, what would you say to her?
I'd say, don't leave home again. Don't move in with people that you don't know, because you may have moved in with the wrong sort of person and you may not move out. Could I have done anything or said anything differently? No, I couldn't have, because nobody would believe me.
So 25 years later or so, 2021, we're still talking about Fred West. What does that say to you?
It says that it's a, if you can call it subject, it's going to go on for many, many years. It's probably going to go on until Rose passes, or even after Rose passes, because it's such a notorious subject. and so many people have been done wrong by it that it's never going to go away.
Do you think that the shadow of Fred will hang over everyone that was involved?
Yeah, I think the shadow of Fred is going to hang around just as long as Rose is going to hang around.
And what about after that?
Still continue. They were a couple. They were devoted to each other. They were in this together.
You pick and choose who you talk to, and rightly so. You know, what kind of do you hope or that comes from this situation?
I just hope that people listen to what I have to say, and I can't say it enough times. Please don't go to people that you don't know. You don't know their background. You may not come out of it.
Fred and Rose West's reign of terror was brought to an end in 1994, and the tragic, indelible mark they've made on the city will continue for many years to come. Gloucester is known for many wonderful reasons, but unfortunately the names Fred and Rose West are a reminder of the pain they caused in what seems to be a never-ending saga.